Who let him cry like that? Preston Calwell's voice boomed through the marble halls sharp enough to stop clocks. The wail had pierced the mansion's heavy silence, and now so had his fury. Maya Williams froze her damp microfiber cloth stalled on the second-story window glass. She'd only been working at the Calwell estate for 5 days, assigned to routine cleaning in the East Wing. No one ever mentioned the 5th floor. Most of the staff avoided it like a cursed place, in fact. But that sound, the high cyclical sobbing that now rose again, was something she couldn't ignore. It wasn't hungry crying. It wasn't sleepy or cranky. It was the sound of panic, the kind that tears a person apart from the inside out. "Ma'am," the butler's voice echoed up from below. "Stay clear of the upper wing." She didn't answer. Maya ascended the final steps, her heart hammering. At the end of the long hall, behind a slightly ajar door with a flickering light cast by a sensory projector, a boy of about 7 was huddled on the thick carpet. He was rocking violently, hitting his forehead rhythmically against a tall bookshelf, unsupervised, uncomforted, just sheer pain and repetition. She paused on the threshold. Every fiber of her being urged her to retreat, but something deeper, something old and buried, kept her rooted. Her brother James used to do the exact same thing, the rocking, the same sound. She remembered him vividly under the dining table, arms tight across his chest, face wet with tears no one could fathom. Maya slipped softly into the room and crouched several feet away. "Hey, sweetie," she whispered, her voice a thread barely audible over his cries. "I'm not gonna touch you. I'll just sit right here." The boy didn't respond, but his movement slowed ever so slightly. She kept her hands open and visible, palms up. Then slowly she raised one hand and traced a simple sign across her chest. Safe. A motion she hadn't used in years. It was one her grandma Loretta had taught her to soothe James when words were useless. The boy glanced at her for just an instant. Then he continued rocking. A sharp voice cut the air behind her. "What in God's name are you doing?" Maya spun around. Preston Calwell stood in the doorway, a towering figure of meticulous order and barely contained rage. In one hand he held his cell phone. The other gripped the doorknob like he was about to crush it. "I'm sorry, sir," Maya said, instinctively rising. "I heard him cry." "And who authorized you to be in this room?" "No one. I just thought he might be in danger. Get away from my son." Her muscles tensed, but she obeyed. She carefully stepped aside as Preston strode toward the boy. The moment he tried to lift his son, the child exploded, screaming louder, kicking, scratching arms, flailing in pure, unadulterated panic. Preston struggled to hold him, startled by the intensity. "What's wrong with him?" he muttered. "Why does he do that?" "May I?" Maya said gently, taking one step forward again. Preston didn't stop her. She knelt, extended a hand, and the moment the boy sensed her presence, his cries stopped. He turned toward her and melted into her arms as if he'd been waiting for her all his life. His small hands clutched her sleeve. He buried his face in her shoulder. The silence that followed was absolute. If this moment tugged at your heart like Maya's empathy. She didn't use language to save him, but a quiet understanding. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. You might not be the only one nearby feeling this warmth right now. Preston was stunned. "How? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Sir Maya said softly. "I just listened and signed. Just a little sign language, you know. My brother is nonverbal autistic. This used to help him calm down." Preston's rigid posture eased almost imperceptibly. Suddenly his tailored suit seemed too tight. His commanding presence, so strong a minute ago, was now suspended as if he was unsure of his next move. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya. Maya Williams. I clean the East Wing. You're not a therapist." "No, sir. Just a cleaner." "Huh." He watched her hold his son like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Can you stay a little longer today?" Maya nodded, still gently swaying with the boy in her arms. "Yes, sir," she whispered. Preston turned and slowly left the room. For the first time in months, the house was truly quiet. No painful echoes, no tense footfalls, no slamming doors. Just a boy and a not-so-stranger wrapped in a silent truce. And though Preston didn't voice it, the look on his face said everything. Something had changed. Something new was beginning. The sun had already set when Maya walked back downstairs. Her back was a little sore from holding the boy Eli Preston had called him. He'd soundly fallen asleep in her arms, his face pressed against her shoulder curve as if it belonged there. She had gently laid him on a plush beanbag in the corner of his nursery, covering him with a weighted blanket she'd found folded in the closet. He hadn't budged. Now the large silent mansion felt heavier than when she'd first entered. Every crystal chandelier glittered, but the light was cold. Every marble tile underfoot clicked like a reminder of her low standing. She was a temporary maid, nothing more, and she had just violated a critical boundary. She turned toward the service corridor, half expecting to be immediately fired. "Ms. Williams." The voice came from behind her, sharp and distinct. She turned and found Preston Caldwell standing at the end of the hall, arms crossed, an indecipherable expression. He no longer held his phone. Instead, he held a small, leather-bound notepad, the kind corporate executives used when something official was about to happen. Maya instinctively straightened. "Yes, sir. My office, please." Her heart sank slightly. She nodded and followed him down the long hall, through a set of double doors, into an office she'd only ever dusted the exterior of. It was immaculate, aggressively modern, and subtly decorated. Dark wood shelves held books with uncracked spines. A wall of windows overlooked the private back garden. At the far end sat a massive polished oak desk. He gestured to the chair facing the desk. "Sit down." Maya obeyed, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. Preston sat across from her and remained silent for several seconds. He tapped a pen against the edge of the notepad. She could hear the faint tick-tock of a tall clock in the distance. It felt like a court hearing, and she wasn't sure if she was the witness or the accused. "You handled him as if you'd done it countless times," he finally said. "I haven't. Not with him. Only with someone like him. My brother." "Yes, sir. James. He passed away 4 years ago. He was 10. Preston's eyes lifted, and for one brief moment something human crossed his face. "I'm sorry. Thank you." He was silent again. Then he leaned back. No therapist, no specialist, no trained professional has been able to calm him like that. Not in 2 years. They all failed, and you just walked in there rag in hand and fixed him. A lump formed in Maya's throat. "I didn't fix him, sir. I just saw him." "Huh." The tapping pen went still. "You saw him. Kids like Eli don't need to be fixed. They need to be heard. You can't rush their silence. You have to be willing to share it with them." Preston blinked slowly. "You sound like someone who should be doing a lot more than scrubbing floors." "I'm just someone who needed work, sir. My grandmother has medical bills, and this pays better than the diner." He glanced down at his notes, then snapped the notepad shut. "I want to make you an offer." Maya blinked. "Sir, I need someone who connects with Eli. Someone who is consistent. Not another overqualified stranger with a clipboard and a 2-week contract. Someone he already trusts. I don't need a nanny. I need you." She shook her head softly. "Sir, with all due respect, I'll double your salary." He cut in, giving her no time to finish. "You'll move into the staff wing private room, all expenses covered, weekends off, health insurance if you need it. And you won't push a mop again." Maya felt her heart accelerate. The figures danced in her mind. That kind of money could mean proper care for Grandma Loretta. No more skipped medications. No more food stamps, stretched thin. But she also knew the danger. This was more than a job. It involved a child with fragile routines and even more fragile trust. If she said yes and failed him, she wouldn't just be another failed sitter. It would be a deep betrayal. "I don't know if I can." Preston leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Look, I've had behavioral analysts with Stanford degrees sitters from elite agencies, even a family counselor who charged $2,000 an hour. None of them lasted a week. You walked in, said nothing, and my son put his head on your shoulder. I don't know what that is, but I know it's rare." Maya swallowed. "It's not magic, sir. It's just care. That's even rarer." She looked down at her chipped polish hands. She thought of Loretta, of her quiet voice telling her, Sweetheart, when God opens a door, don't stand there arguing about the knob. When do I start tomorrow morning? I'll have the room prepared tonight. Maya nodded. Okay. I'll try. Preston stood up and extended his hand. She shook it small and firm. As she left the office, her mind was racing. She hadn't packed for a live-in position. She hadn't even notified her landlord. But beneath all the noise there was something quieter, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose. The next morning, Maya arrived with a small duffel bag over her shoulder and a cardboard box under her arm. Mrs. Green, the head housekeeper, led her to the staff quarters on the mansion's east side near the back garden. The room was simple but comfortable, a twin bed, a reading chair, a desk facing the window. Mr. Caldwell had this set up last night, Mrs. Green said, handing Maya an access card. He said you were essential. Just a helper, maybe. He doesn't give out private rooms to just helpers. Maya offered a polite smile and quickly unpacked. She hung her few clothes and placed a small framed photo of Larita and a young James on the nightstand. By 9:30 a.m., she was back outside Eli's nursery. This time, when she entered, the boy was already awake. He was sitting on the rug sorting colored building blocks into two blue-toned piles. "Good morning, Eli," she said softly. He didn't look up, but he paused just for a moment. She walked closer and sat cross-legged several feet away, silent, non-intrusive. After a few minutes, he nudged a red block toward her with the tip of his shoe. She smiled. "Thank you." She nudged a blue block back. The silent exchange had begun. The hours passed like this. No words, just color, rhythm, repetition. At one point, she began humming soft, low, familiar gospel tunes. Eli didn't protest. In fact, he leaned slightly forward like someone drawn to a warm hearth. Preston watched from the doorway in silence. He wasn't ready to articulate it, but something about the way Maya simply sat there quiet and unwavering, not trying to control or force, made his chest ache in a new way. Not pain, not fear, but hope. Maya stood by the nursery window as the afternoon sun cast golden dust motes. Her arms were loosely crossed, her gaze fixed on the quiet garden below. The day had been calmer than expected, no screaming, no meltdowns, no frantic pacing. Eli hadn't spoken, of course. He still moved silently, mostly absorbed with the wooden puzzles and color-sorting games she had laid out, but this time he'd let her sit closer. He hadn't flinched when she hummed a soft melody. He had even briefly touched her sleeve once when she reached toward him for a blue triangular piece. That small contact had sparked something within her, a cautious, almost sacred hope. Behind her, she heard soft footsteps. She turned just as Preston Caldwell entered the nursery. He wasn't in his usual suit, just a white button-down with the sleeves neatly rolled and gray trousers. His face looked less hard-edged than usual, a little softer around his eyes. "How was today?" he asked, his voice noticeably quieter than the sharp barking tone she remembered from their first meeting. "Peaceful," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "No incidents, no biting or hitting." He held his ground. Preston walked a little further into the room, his gaze fixed on his son, who was now lying on his belly, carefully pushing a toy train along its track. "I don't know what you're doing," he murmured, "but it's working." "It's not a trick, Mr. Caldwell," she replied gently. "It's about time, respecting his space and letting him set the pace." He nodded slowly, as if attempting to understand a foreign language. "He used to love trains," he said suddenly. "Emma, my wife, she took him to the railway museum every other Saturday." Maya's gaze shifted to Preston. His face was now turned toward the window, his eyes distant. "He hasn't asked to go since she died," he continued, his voice low and even. "Not once. She didn't speak. She didn't push. She simply let the silence hold its moment. I thought we were doing fine," he went on. "After the funeral, I hired the best therapists money could buy. I signed him up for every specialized program. I spared no expense. But everything just got worse. The tantrums, the fear of strangers, the screaming." He turned back to Maya. "And now you're here, and he's calmer than I've seen him in over a year." Maya shifted slightly. "Grief isn't something you treat like a cold, Mr. Caldwell. It's not linear. Not for you." not for him. Preston didn't respond immediately, then asked, "Do you think he remembers her?" "I think he feels her absence," she said after a pause. "Even if he doesn't have the words for it." He sat in the armchair by the bookshelf, elbows on his knees, watching his son with a mixture of guilt and bewilderment. "We were married 10 years, he said abruptly. "Met in college. I was all structure. She was spontaneity." She laughed too loudly. "We danced barefoot on our apartment balcony in the rain. She made midnight pancakes." Maya smiled. "She sounds lovely." "She was," he said, and his voice broke slightly. "Just a little." Eli looked up for a moment, staring intently at his father. Preston stood up and approached his son slowly. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, crouching beside him. "How's the train going?" Eli didn't speak or react, but he didn't pull away either. Preston looked at Maya. "Do you think he'll ever talk again?" "I think he already is," she replied, her eyes warm. "We just have to learn to hear the version of language he trusts." He held his son's gaze a moment longer, then nodded and stood. Later that evening, Maya returned to her room in the staff wing. It was modest but cozy. She had unpacked her few belongings, 3 outfits, 2 books, a worn journal, and the framed photograph of her grandma Loretta holding a young James. She picked it up, tracing the glass. "You'd like him," she whispered. "He's a bit of a mess, but he's really trying." A knock came at the door. She opened it to find Mrs. Green holding a tray with a covered dish and a folded napkin. "Mr. Caldwell says you haven't eaten since lunch," the older woman said, a curious tone in her voice. "He insisted you have a proper dinner." Maya blinked. "I didn't realize. I lost track of time." Apparently the boy did too. No screaming today. A genuine miracle. Maya accepted the tray with a grateful smile. "Thank you." Before turning to leave, Mrs. Green paused. "Don't get too comfortable," she cautioned, though her voice lacked malice. "Mr. Caldwell is unpredictable." Maya nodded once. "I don't expect anything." She closed the door and sat at her desk, lifting the dish cover. Grilled chicken, roasted yams, and steamed green beans. Her stomach rumbled instantly. As she ate, her mind replayed the image of Preston kneeling beside his son. It was brief but truly vulnerable and genuine, and she couldn't help but wonder what kind of man tries to control the world but forgets how to simply hold his own child. The next morning, Maya entered the nursery at 8:30 a.m. sharp. Eli was already awake, sitting by the window, tracing shapes on the glass. The morning sun drew a warm stripe across the rug. "Good morning, Eli," she said quietly, approaching slowly. He didn't turn, but he didn't tense up. She sat down next to him, a safe distance away. After a few minutes of quiet, she pulled out a small whiteboard and a dry erase marker. "I thought we could try something," she said gently. She drew a sun, then a cloud, and handed him the marker. He stared at it for a long while, then calmly took it and drew a wobbly heart. Maya smiled even as tears pricked at her eyes. From the hallway, Preston had stopped outside the door. He observed the moment through the slight crack, his hand near the knob but not turning it. Something inside him was moving slowly and painfully, like a rusted hinge finally learning to turn again. He walked away before they noticed, but his thoughts lingered in the room. That night he sat alone in his study with a glass of scotch he didn't touch. On his desk was a file, Maya Williams' application, her background check, and a handwritten recommendation from her former manager at a diner in Queens. He read the note twice. "She's not fancy, but she shows up early, works late, and never complains. She's kind and she knows how to listen even when people don't know how to speak." Preston folded the paper and leaned back in his chair. Outside, the wind rustled the trees along the stone wall. Inside, for the first time in months, the silence felt like comfort, not emptiness. In a house built on wealth secured by rules and tormented by loss, someone had finally arrived who didn't try to patch the cracks, she simply sat beside them. And for Eli, and perhaps for Preston too, that was enough to start over. Nearly 3 weeks had passed since Maya Williams took the job that wasn't hers, caring for the boy no one could reach. By now, her presence in the Caldwell mansion had evolved from an anomaly to a necessity. Every morning she entered Eli's room with the same quiet ritual, no sudden moves, no dramatic gestures, just the steady act of being present. and in return Eli began to offer more. He hadn't spoken, but his eyes sought her. He followed her with silent confidence, handing her small objects, a block, a button, a puzzle piece, as if they were messages he didn't yet know how to write. That morning, Maya introduced a new routine. She brought a soft, matte-scented clay and a series of cards with bold, cartoonish emotion pictures. "This is happy," she said, showing the first card. "Happy like when the music's playing." Eli took the card, touched it once, then looked at her face. Slowly, he pressed it against his chest. "Yes," she whispered. "That's right." When Preston came home that evening, the house felt different again, not the year-long heavy silence, not empty but faintly humming with life. In the kitchen, Mrs. Green had soft jazz playing on a tablet. Windows were slightly open. Somewhere upstairs a child giggled, not loud, not boisterous, but a quick, pure sound that stopped him instantly. He dropped his keys on the hall table and followed the sound. Maya was kneeling on the family room rug with a toy giraffe in one hand and a sock puppet on the other. Eli sat opposite her, legs crossed, watching intently as the giraffe and the puppet acted out a silly fight over a pretend teacup. When the puppet fell over with a squeak, Eli's mouth stretched into a wide smile. No sound came out, but his entire face glowed. Preston couldn't remember the last time he'd witnessed that. Maya saw him in the doorway. She quickly stood, dusting off her trousers. "Mr. Caldwell, I didn't hear you come in." He walked in slowly, still looking at Eli. "He's laughing," she nodded. "Sort of." No sound, but it was close. Preston crouched beside his son. "Hey, buddy," he said. Eli didn't pull away or flinch. He reached out and briefly touched his father's shirt before returning to the toys. Preston felt a lump form in his throat. "He's trusting you more," Maya said quietly. Preston nodded, his gaze fixed on his son. He used to play like this with Emma. She had that ridiculous puppet voice. He loved it. He stood and looked at Maya. "Thank you." She offered a slight, warm-eyed smile. "I'm not doing anything you can't do. That's what I find hardest to believe," he said, half joking, half defeated. Later that night, Maya went out to the small garden behind the staff wing. It was late spring and the azaleas had just begun to bloom. She carried a mug of tea, her Grandma Larita's dried hibiscus and cinnamon blend. She sat on the wooden bench under the magnolia tree and inhaled deeply. She'd initially feared her stay would be temporary. One wrong word, one poorly timed moment, and she'd be back to scrubbing. But Preston didn't just tolerate her, he'd started seeking her out. At first only to discuss Eli, then meals, then books, and lately just to talk. She wasn't naive enough to think she belonged in his sphere. He was privileged, powerful, and reserved. She was none of those. But when they talked, when they were truly honest, there was something balanced about it, something profoundly human. The garden gate creaked behind her. She turned. Preston stood in the moonlight, 2 mugs in hand. "Thought you might prefer chamomile," he said. She blinked in surprise. How considerate. Thought it was either that or more bourbon. And you don't strike me as a before-bed bourbon drinker. She chuckled. That would put me under the table. He sat beside her, not too close. "You come out here every night when I can't sleep." "Same drink?" They drank in silence for a moment. I meant to ask, his voice was lower now, more careful. "Your brother, what happened?" She exhaled slowly. He had a seizure, complications from an infection. He passed away at the hospital while I was doing the insurance paperwork. Preston looked at her. "I am so sorry." He was the only person in the world who saw me without expecting anything in return. He was quiet. Then he said, "Does that sound like Eli?" "Yes," she said quietly. "It does." Another pause. Preston ran a hand through his hair. "You make this look easy, but I know it isn't. I know I'm difficult, that this house can be cold, that Eli's challenges can be overwhelming." She turned to him. "You're not difficult, Mr. Caldwell. You're grieving in the only way you know how." Their eyes met. "Call me Preston, please." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, Preston." A gust of wind rustled the branches. The second-floor lights glowed softly through the windows. Somewhere above them, Eli shifted in his bed. "I want to learn," Preston said suddenly. I want to know what you know about him and how to truly connect." Maya's heart thumped faster. "You're halfway there. I watch you with him. The way you interpret his cues, the way you anticipate his needs. I don't have that instinct." "You don't need instinct," she said. "You need commitment, and he will teach you if you have the patience to listen." He looked at her, and for a split second something changed in the space between them. "I want to try," he said. And for the first time, Maya saw not the CEO nor the man of perfect control, but a father, vulnerable, imperfect, and finally ready. The next day, everything shifted. Maya held a brief lesson in the sunroom. Simple signs, more done help love. Preston joined them, clumsy but sincere. Eli watched, then copied. At one point, Preston signed more, and Eli responded with a half-formed version of the same gesture. Preston's eyes welled, but he didn't say a word. He just nodded, smiled, and took his son's hand. Later that night, Maya wrote in her journal by the window, documenting the moment. "He is finding his way back to his son," she wrote. "Not as a savior, but as a father, learning a new language, one built on silence, trust, and steady hands." She looked up when a knock came at the door. Preston was outside with a book. "I found this among Emma's things," he said. "It's about raising children with sensory differences. I thought we could read it together." She took it carefully. "I'd like that." And then before he left, she added, "Thank you for staying." That night, Maya sat on her bed with the book in her lap and the memory of James warm in her chest. She wasn't simply enduring. She was building something slowly and quietly, like Eli's soft laughter, like confidence blooming in unlikely hands. Early summer light flooded the nursery windows, casting golden rays on the wooden floor. Maya sat cross-legged opposite Eli, gently encouraging him to press different animal shapes into a soft piece of kinetic sand. It was their morning sensory routine, a calm, predictable start to the day. Eli didn't speak, but he responded more and more with eye contact, small gestures, even shy smiles. When Maya hummed, he swayed. When she laughed, he tilted his head to watch her longer. And once, when she took the sand mold he liked, he touched her wrist and gently pulled it back. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't reply, but his fingers brushed her palm in gratitude. Preston had started joining these sessions 3 times a week. He no longer hovered at the back, arms crossed and aloof. Now he knelt beside his son, mirroring Maya's gestures, learning the signs slowly but with deep focus. Cow Maya signed that morning, forming horns with her fingers. Eli didn't copy, but he stared. Then he pointed to the small cow figure on the mat and pressed it into the sand with surprising care. Preston chuckled low and genuine. "He's understanding," he said. Maya smiled and turned to him. "Are you?" That afternoon, Preston invited her for a walk in the garden after lunch. Eli had fallen asleep in the sunroom, wrapped loosely in a blanket with a teddy bear tucked in his hand. Maya hesitated, unsure if it was strictly professional, but then followed him past the manicured hedges toward the quiet arbor. They walked slowly, side by side. Preston had removed his jacket and loosened his collar. It was the first time she'd seen him without that constant armor. "Eli's therapist called this morning," he said. "I didn't mention it earlier because I wanted to see how today went." Maya looked up. "Is everything all right?" His developmental scores are still lagging, but she noted significant behavioral improvements. "Attachment. He's learning to trust again," Maya said softly. "That requires more than therapy. That requires security." Preston nodded, hands in his pockets. She also said, "Well," she asked what had changed at home. "I told her it was you." Maya laughed softly, tucking a braid behind her ear. "I'm only a small part." He stopped and turned to her. "You're the part that matters." She met his gaze, and for a brief second the world shrunk. The breeze dropped. The sound of birds faded. Preston's expression was different now, not the guarded, controlled distance she expected, but something quieter and raw. "Before Emma died," he began, his voice deeper than usual. "She said I was always 2 steps behind, that I never saw what was right in front of me until it was too late." Maya said nothing, just listened. She handled everything: school meetings, therapy, the meltdowns. I just wrote the checks. He swallowed hard, and when she got sick, I panicked. I started controlling everything, as if order could save her, as if structure could replace her presence. Grief makes us hold on to anything that's still, Maya said gently, because what moves can disappear. He stared at her, surprised. Then he nodded slowly. You speak like someone who has lost something. Someone who has lost someone, she corrected. Her voice was barely a whisper. We all carry scars. They continued walking in silence. Shadows stretched across the garden. Maya reached out and touched a blooming camellia. These used to grow outside my grandma's porch, she murmured. She always said they were stubborn flowers. They bloomed when they felt like it, not when everyone else expected them to. Sounds familiar, Preston said. She smiled. I suppose it does. That afternoon, as the sun began to set and Eli napped on the sofa, Maya found herself in the study. Preston had asked her to look through an old therapy folder he'd found in the cabinet. Notes and videos from Eli's first sessions. Emma filmed everything he said, handing her a USB drive. She always said, one day we'll forget the hard parts and miss the details. Let's save the details. Maya sat at the desk and opened the folder on the screen. The first video played. A much younger Eli, around 4, sat at a small table with a therapist. Emma's voice narrated softly from behind the camera, coaching Preston on how to use the signs for eat, sleep, and mommy. Maya watched silently as the video continued. In one clip, Eli reached for Preston and made a clumsy sign for love. Emma's laugh followed. That's your daddy, baby. Good job. Maya turned slightly in her chair and saw Preston standing in the doorway. He didn't come in, just watched. His face was pale. I forgot about that video, he said. I haven't watched these since before the funeral. She was good with him, Maya said. She was everything, he replied. His voice cracked slightly, and I erased her. Maya stood up and walked slowly toward him. No, you didn't. You were surviving. You shut down in silence. Preston looked at her. That's what I was doing. Yes. But now you're healing. He stared at her, unreadable. And are you healing too? She paused. I think so. Some days more than others. For a long moment they stood there with nothing but the soft hum of the computer and the faint ghost of Emma's laughter in the background. Then gently Preston reached out and touched Maya's hand. She didn't withdraw. That night, something shifted. Not with words, not with declarations, but with presence. Maya lay in bed, unable to sleep. Her heart pounded quickly, not from fear, but from a profound awareness. Something was evolving between them, something unspoken yet undeniable. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's life. She felt like maybe she belonged. Upstairs, Eli stirred in his sleep and murmured a soft, sharp sound. Almost a word. Maya didn't hear it, but the house did. Now he was listening, and so was she. The next morning began with the smell of cinnamon wafting through the kitchen. Maya stood barefoot on the tile floor, carefully flipping slices of French toast on the griddle. Her apron was dusted with flour, and a slight smile played on her lips as she hummed an old Sam Cooke tune softly. It was a quiet, simple joy, something she hadn't felt in years. Preston walked in silently, freshly showered and dressed in a white button-down and gray trousers, no tie for once. He stopped in the doorway, watching her work. I didn't know breakfast could sound this good, he said softly. Maya glanced over her shoulder. You mean the aroma? He leaned against the doorframe. I meant the sound. There was a slight, meaningful pause. She slid 2 golden slices onto a plate and turned off the burner. Eli's still asleep. Thought I'd surprise him. He likes the edges a little crispy. Preston walked into the kitchen and began setting out forks and napkins. You always remember the details. Maya looked down, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The details are where the heart lives. He paused, considering her words. Then he continued setting the table. I never realized how empty this place felt until you started filling it. Before Maya could reply, the baby monitor on the counter crackled softly, Eli's sleepy whimper. then the soft thump of his feet hitting the rug. Maya moved instinctively, pulling off her apron. "I'll go." Preston touched her wrist. "Let me." It was a subtle shift, but she understood. This was his moment. She watched him leave the kitchen and walk up the stairs, a man who used to keep one hand on the world and one foot out the door, now fully present. When he returned with Eli in his arms, the boy held a small teddy bear and blinked at the morning light. Preston gently settled him in his high chair and sat beside him. "Good morning, buddy," Maya said, placing the plate in front of him. "Your favorite." Eli didn't reply, but he picked up a piece of toast with his fingers and began chewing slowly. Maya watched the careful, patient way Preston helped him with the syrup. There was no rush in the room, no pressure, only connection. Later that day, the house received a visitor, Dr. Lydia Chen, Eli's longtime developmental psychologist, a petite woman with sharp eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses. She'd known Eli since he was 2. She entered the foyer with a quiet smile. "It still smells like expensive silence in here," she said, half joking. Preston chuckled. "That's changing." Maya offered her a glass of water and walked her to the sunroom where Eli was stacking wooden blocks by the window. Preston watched from the doorway, his hands slightly clenched. Dr. Chen observed the boy silently, then leaned toward Maya. "He's focused," she whispered, "and calm." Preston walked in. "Do you see progress?" Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "Not just in behavior, but in attachment. He's forming bonds." Preston looked at Maya. Dr. Chen followed his gaze. "Tell me, Ms. Williams," she said. "What are you doing differently?" Maya hesitated. "I treat him like he's already whole, not broken." Dr. Chen studied her. "That is uncommon." "It shouldn't be," Maya replied softly. After the session, Dr. Chen pulled Preston aside. "You've done more than hire help," she said. "You've invited something sacred into this house. Don't forget that." Preston didn't reply immediately. He watched Maya in the distance, kneeling beside Eli, teaching him the sign for happy with his hands. His son imitated her timidly, but it was there. That afternoon, Maya went out to the garden alone, needing space to think. The camellias were blooming profusely now with pink and white petals. She sat on the stone bench and exhaled slowly. She was growing dangerously attached. This was supposed to be temporary, a job, a brief chapter. But somewhere in the quiet moments, in Eli's touch and Preston's changing look, it had begun to feel like something more. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo, her mother and little sister on a porch swing. Her mother was laughing, head thrown back. Her sister's hands were caught mid-sign. Maya traced their faces with her thumb. "I still carry you," she whispered. Footsteps approached behind her. "Hope I'm not interrupting." Preston's voice was soft now. Maya quickly put the photo away. "Just thinking." He sat down beside her, not too close. "I meant to ask you," he began, then paused. "Why did you take this job?" She turned to him, her eyes calm. "Because I needed to remember who I was. When you first arrived, I dismissed you. I made assumptions. I thought you were just the maid," he said without malice. He seemed genuinely ashamed. "I was." Maya met his eyes. "People do that all the time." "But you're not," he insisted. "No," she whispered. "I'm someone who sees people others overlook." He nodded slowly. "You saw him, and now I see you." Something shifted in the air between them, delicate and profound. That night, as the sun set and shadows painted the hallways, Maya passed the open study door. Inside, Preston was sitting at the piano, the old upright Maya had dusted weeks earlier. He played a few hesitant chords, then began a wobbly, unsure but charming melody. She stood silently listening. When he finished, she walked in. "I didn't know you played. I used to. Emma made me promise to teach Eli someday." "Keep that promise," Maya said. "Music speaks even when we don't." He looked up. "Will you sit with me?" She did. He started again, slower. This time Maya hummed, and without conscious thought began to sing the lyrics to an old lullaby, Eli's lullaby. Her hands moved gracefully, her face illuminated by tenderness. Preston stopped playing and simply watched. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. Maya looked at him, her hands paused mid-motion. "I'm just present," she replied. "Most people aren't." Preston reached out and brushed her wrist with the tip of one finger. It was a question. She didn't pull away. It was an answer. Upstairs, Eli stirred in his bed, and for the first time he cried out not a shriek, but a word. "Dada." It echoed down the staircase like a bell. Preston froze. Maya gasped, and the house, so long wrapped in silence and grief, suddenly felt alive again. The word hung suspended in the air like a fragile miracle. Dada. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfectly formed, but it was there, real alive. Preston shot to his feet, nearly tipping the piano bench. Maya was already moving her instincts sharper than her thoughts, and together they raced upstairs. The world had instantly sharpened because of that single word. Eli sat straight up in bed, his small hands gripping the edge of the blanket. His eyes were wide, not scared, just uncertain, as if he himself was surprised by what had left his mouth. But when he saw Preston in the doorway, something shimmered on his face, a kind of vulnerable hope. Preston dropped to his knees beside the bed. "Say it again," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Please, just one more time." Eli blinked and parted his lips. He looked at Maya, who stood just behind, and then back at his father. The words didn't come, only a small hand reaching forward, resting against Preston's chest. It was enough. Preston wrapped his son in his arms, holding him as if he might fall apart if he didn't. "You did it," he murmured over and over, his forehead gently pressed against Eli's hair. "You did it, buddy." Maya stood silently in the doorway, her hands clasped over her chest. She didn't interfere, didn't speak. This moment belonged to them, but her damp, soft, shining eyes held the quiet satisfaction of someone who had given a piece of herself and was now witnessing something sacred blossom. The next morning, the house felt utterly transformed. There was a light in the windows that hadn't been there before, a warmth in the silence that used to feel hollow. Even the staff moved differently, slower, quieter, more respectful, as if sensing the shift. None of them could explain it. Preston canceled all his meetings for the day. His assistant didn't question it. Family day, he'd stated. Non-negotiable. He spent the morning with Eli reading picture books in the sunroom, building towers with plastic bricks, and most astonishingly, he laughed when Eli made a silly face. It wasn't much, but it was a sound Preston had waited years to hear, a sound that brought him to the verge of tears more than once. Maya stayed close, not hovering, just present. She brought snacks, wiped sticky fingers, offered gentle encouragement, and each time Preston looked at her, she smiled, small, fleeting but real smiles. Around noon, Dr. Chen turned. "That doesn't surprise me." They moved aside into the dining room, leaving Eli and Maya to play uninterrupted. "You know this changes everything," Lydia said. "You'll need to consider long-term care, adjusting routines, and possibly reintroducing therapies. His progress could rapidly accelerate now." "I want you to lead it," Preston said, "but only if Maya stays involved." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "She's not a therapist, Preston. She's something better," he replied. "She's someone he trusts." Lydia considered this, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." After lunch, Maya took a brief break. She walked again to the garden, her quiet spot, and sat by the camellias. The spring breeze stirred her braids, and she tilted her face to the sun, letting it warm her skin. She should be happy. Eli had spoken. Preston was changing, but there was a tremor in her chest she couldn't name. She was taking root where she'd promised herself she wouldn't. Maya. She turned. Preston stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, a hesitant smile on his lips. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said. "You didn't." He sat down beside her on the bench. "I was thinking we should celebrate, just something small. Dinner tonight, just us and Eli." Maya's eyes softened. "That sounds lovely." He nodded. "And tomorrow I want to show you something. Something personal." She tilted her head. "It's not far. Just something I haven't shared in a long time about Emma." The mention of his late wife sobered the mood. Maya placed a gentle hand on his arm. You don't have to. I want to, he said. You've given so much to our home. I want you to know where all this began. That night, dinner was simple but profound. Grilled salmon asparagus and mashed sweet potatoes. Maya cooked, Preston set the table, and Eli picked a napkin for each of them. He handed Maya a blue one himself, a red one, and his father a yellow one. It was the first time Maya saw him make a deliberate choice that included her. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace. Preston poured each of them a glass of wine, Maya only half a glass as she preferred. I used to sit here with Emma, he said quietly. This exact spot. When we first bought the house, we couldn't afford to furnish most of it, but we had a fireplace and a used record player. He smiled, his gaze distant. She used to sing to Eli every night, even when he didn't respond. Even when the silence seemed endless, she never gave up on him. A lump formed in Maya's throat. You remind me of her, he said suddenly. Not because you're similar, but because you love with the same stubborn depth. She looked at him surprised. Preston, I don't say that lightly. There was a pause. The fire crackled. I don't know where this is going, he admitted. But I know what I feel when you're near, and I know how Eli changes around you. She looked down, her heart racing. Do you feel it too? He asked. Maya met his gaze. Yes, but I'm afraid. Me too. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Later that night, Maya lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her room was small, modest, tucked away in the back of the house, but it was hers for now. A knock came at the door. Her heart pounding, she got up and opened it. It was Preston, no suit, no armor, just him. I couldn't sleep, he said. Me neither. He didn't step in. He didn't try to reach for her. He simply looked at her as if she mattered. I just wanted to tell you thank you. For helping me find him. For helping me find myself. She smiled softly. Good night, Preston. Good night, Maya. He walked away. She closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled long and deep. It wasn't love yet, but it was something real. And that was how it truly began. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Maya's room, casting soft golden shapes on the floor. She lingered in bed longer than usual, her eyes open, her heart beating with a strange calmness. The memory of Preston's voice from the night before lingered in the silence. It hadn't been a confession, not exactly, but it had been something deeper, an invitation to a truth they were both still learning to name. When she arrived in the kitchen, the house was already active. Eli was sitting at the island counter, sipping orange juice from a plastic cup, while Preston leaned over a skillet, attempting to make scrambled eggs. Maya paused in the doorway, watching them both, father and son, side by side like a long-awaited family album photograph. Preston was the first to notice her. Good morning, he said with a warm smile, wearing a navy t-shirt and jeans instead of his usual button-down. Eli turned, saw Maya, and his eyes lit up. He didn't speak, but he reached out for her hand. It was the first time he had initiated contact. Maya crossed the room and took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Good morning, honey, she whispered. Preston watched the corner of his mouth twitching in silent amazement. I was thinking we might take Eli to the park today, he said. There's one not far from here, Pittman Park. I haven't taken him out in a while, but I feel like maybe it's time. Maya blinked, surprised. That's a big step. I know, but I want to try. The outing was imperfectly planned, and that was part of its charm. Maya packed a small bag with snacks and wipes. Preston brought a blanket and a collapsible stroller. Eli wore a baseball cap he refused to take off. The car ride was quiet, but peaceful, with soft jazz playing and the city slowly unfolding through the windows. Pittman Park was bustling with life, spring break kids laughing, couples walking dogs, and seniors reading newspapers on benches. They found a spot under a tall oak tree and spread the blanket. Preston sat with Eli, pointing out the ducks on the pond while Maya unpacked sliced apples and cheese crackers. Eli didn't say much, but his eyes followed everything. He watched a group of children playing kickball nearby, and his gaze lingered there longer than usual. Want to try, Eli? Preston asked, gently nodding toward the game. Eli looked at Maya, his expression uncertain. She smiled. We'll just watch for now. Maybe next time. He seemed satisfied with that, snuggling into her side and eating a cracker. A few minutes later, a voice called from across the field. "Mr. Caldwell, is that you?" Preston looked up. A woman in her 40s, dressed in athletic wear and sunglasses, approached. "Rebecca Thorne," she said, extending her hand. "We met at the Chamber of Commerce dinner last year." Preston was polite but wary. "Ah, yes, of course. Good to see you." Rebecca looked at Maya, then at Eli. "I heard this must be your son. Well, I'm glad to see he's doing well." Maya felt a subtle, unmistakable shift in tone. That quick assessment, that flicker of surprise at Maya's presence next to them. Rebecca's eyes didn't linger, but her smile tightened. Your new nanny, Preston, straightened. "This is Maya Williams. She's part of our family." Rebecca blinked. "Oh, well, how nice. I'll let you enjoy your day. Listen, I don't want to intrude, just wanted to say hello. We should catch up sometime. I'll text you." With that, she hurried off. Maya pretended to focus on Eli's snack, but she felt the heat rise up her neck. Preston sat back down beside her, silent for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You don't have to be." "No," he insisted, turning to her. "You deserve more than to be seen as someone who works for me." Maya looked him in the eye. "I don't need the approval of strangers, Preston. I know who I am." His expression softened. "I wish everyone had your clarity." They spent another hour in the park, letting Eli explore the grass, listen to the birds, and collect small stones as if they were treasures. When it was time to go, he didn't cry. He took Maya's hand and walked with her to the car. That night, as twilight settled over the estate, Preston stood by his study window with an untouched glass of scotch. Maya tapped softly on the door. "Come in." She entered, stopping at the threshold. "Eli's asleep." "Thank you." He gestured for her to sit. "There's something I want to show you." He opened a drawer and pulled out a worn photo album. Maya walked over and sat beside him on the leather sofa. The album smelled faintly of old paper and lavender. "This," he said, opening it to the first page, "was Emma's idea. She started it when we found out we were pregnant. Every month a new picture, every milestone. After she passed, I stopped adding to it." The photos were beautiful. Emma's radiant smile, baby Eli wrapped in blankets, tiny footprints pressed in ink. As they turned the pages, the images faded from color to grayscale, not physically, but emotionally. "This is the last one," Preston said, pointing to a photo of Emma holding Eli under a maple tree, her face radiant despite the 4-line IV mark taped to her arm. 2 weeks before she died. Maya gently ran her fingers over the plastic cover. She loved him so much. "She did," he whispered. "And I failed him. I shut down. I buried myself in work and meetings and pretending the grief wasn't eating me alive. I was just surviving." Preston turned to her. "You're helping me live." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment. "I want to hire you formally, not just as domestic staff or a caregiver, but as Eli's developmental guide. We'll set up training a plan. I'll make it official." Maya blinked. "That's generous." "It's not generosity, it's a necessity. You've done more for him than any therapist or specialist in the past 2 years. She nodded slowly. "I accept, on one condition. Name it. That we keep doing this together. As a team. No titles, no distance." He held her gaze. "Deal." They sat there, the album open between them, two people bound by loss and something slowly growing beyond it. Just before she left the room, Preston called her name. "Maya." She turned. He stood up, walked toward her, and then unhurriedly he put his arms around her. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something older, a deeper acknowledgement, the kind that says, "I see you." And in the quiet safety of that moment, Maya finally allowed herself to believe she belonged there. The next morning began with an unexpected knock. Not the gentle kind that signaled domestic routine, but a sharp, echoing pounding that stirred both tension and memory. Maya was in the kitchen making Eli's favorite oatmeal when she heard it. Preston appeared seconds later, his brow furrowed even before he reached the door. Outside stood a man in a tailored gray suit with a clipboard under his arm. He wasn't alone. 2 others flanked him, one in casual business attire and one in a smart blazer with an earpiece. The badge on the clipboard read, Child Welfare Services. Mr. Caldwell, the man asked, polite but firm. Preston slowly nodded. Yes. What is this about? I'm Marcus Fielding. We've received a report of possible neglect regarding your son, Eli Caldwell. We're here for an evaluation. For a moment, the only sound was the wind in the trees. By then, Maya had walked into the hall, hugging Eli to her hip. She could feel his small heart racing through her blouse. Preston stepped outside, closing the door halfway behind him. This is absurd. Who filed this report? I'm afraid we aren't permitted to disclose the source during the initial assessment. May we enter? No, Preston said. His voice was calm, but Maya recognized the storm beneath it. Not until I speak with my lawyer. You have every right to contact legal counsel, Marcus replied. However, if you deny entry during a wellness check, we will need to escalate the process. A court order can be sought. Maya stepped forward, still holding Eli, who was now clutching her tighter. He is safe, she said firmly. I have been with him every day. There is no neglect. Marcus studied her. And you are Maya Williams. You've been working here several months. I am his full-time caretaker. Another agent jotted something in a notebook. Preston exhaled sharply. Give me 5 minutes. He went inside and made 2 calls. First to his lawyer, Sandra Griffin, then to the head of a private security firm. When he returned, he opened the door fully. You may enter, but you do so under observation, and you may not touch anything without consent. They walked in, their eyes scanning the foyer as if entering a crime scene. Maya held Eli protectively, whispering in a soft rhythmic pattern only he understood. Preston stayed close, his body language sharp and contained. The agents conducted their assessment with quiet efficiency, checking the pantry, the nursery, the backyard. One agent requested to speak with Eli alone. Maya declined on his behalf. He doesn't speak to strangers. He has autism. I am his comfort, his voice. You can ask and I will sign it for him if necessary. Noted, Marcus said, scribbling. They found nothing. Of course there was nothing to find. But just before leaving, Marcus turned back. This visit was protocol. But unofficially, Mr. Caldwell, it's rare we see a child so well cared for. Whoever sent the tip may have had other motivations. Preston closed the door behind them, his jaw clenched. Maya stood nearby, still holding Eli, who had fallen asleep from the stress. Someone is trying to get to us, she said quietly. Preston nodded. And I think I know who. He didn't mention names. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, Preston convened a meeting in his home office. The guest list included a somber Maya, his lawyer, Sandra Griffin, and a security consultant named Lionel Hatch, a quiet, silver-haired man with decades of experience in federal protection services. This was not random, Preston began. We've been encountering resistance to the upcoming tech acquisition. Quiet pressure. Now this. I want a full background check on everyone who had access to my family's internal calendar. Sandra looked up from her notes. You think it was an internal leak? I think it was personal, Preston said, glancing at Maya and then back at the file. Lionel rapped the table. I'll start the sweep. Phones, laptops, digital footprints. If someone tried to weaponize child welfare, we'll find the source. When the meeting ended, Maya stayed behind. Preston looked at her. You don't have to remain involved in this. Yes, I do, she said. This isn't just your fight now, it's Eli's. And I'm not going anywhere. His eyes flickered. You always talk like someone who has lost something important. Maya exhaled. I have. But Eli isn't going to be one of those things. He didn't reply, but he didn't need to. That night after dinner, Maya sat on the porch swing with Eli nestled against her. Stars were beginning to appear one by one. She watched them light up the sky like old truths finally revealed. Preston joined her with 2 mugs of tea. "Mind if I sit?" She shifted and he took the space beside her, close but not intrusive. "I used to think silence was a curse," he said. "That silence meant something was broken. But I'm starting to understand there are different kinds of silence." She looked at him. "There's the silence of grief," he continued. "The silence of shame. And then there's the kind of silence that's safe. Like right now." Maya held her tea carefully. "Safe silence. That's rare." He nodded, sipping. "You gave that to him and to me, too." They sat in that silence for a long time as the night deepened around them. Then Preston asked, "Do you ever think about what it would mean if Eli could speak? Not just with his hands, but with words?" Maya looked out into the dark yard. "Sometimes. But I think about what he already says in other ways. When he takes my hand, when he leans into me, that's talking. It's just a different language." Preston's voice was quiet. "You're teaching me to hear that language." And then, like a whisper of the wind, a new voice broke the silence. Small, hesitant mama. Maya froze. Preston looked down. Eli, half asleep, had stirred. His lips had formed the syllable again. "Mama." It wasn't imagined anymore. It wasn't a dream. Preston's eyes went wide. Maya's hands trembled. Her breath caught. "Eli, what did you say?" The boy blinked slowly. His eyes fluttered, and then he closed them again. Preston turned to Maya. "Did you hear that I did?" She whispered, her voice cracking. It was the first word he had spoken aloud in nearly 2 years. Preston didn't speak for a full minute. Then he took her hand, no hesitation, no pretense. "We're going to protect him," he said, his voice now firm. "Whoever came after us, they won't get another chance." Maya nodded, and the tears finally escaped. The porch lights flickered softly over them, casting a warm glow on the 3 of them sitting on that old swing, 1 word closer to healing, 1 word closer to a future neither of them had believed possible. The next morning offered no sense of immediate calm. The house was quiet, but underneath its stillness lay a tension, a feeling that something invisible had shifted. Preston rose earlier than usual and went to the gym, throwing himself at the punching bag with an intensity that came not from physical training, but from something deeper, unresolved. Maya woke to the dull thud of his fists, which echoed faintly in the hall. She got out of bed and checked on Eli. He was curled under the quilt, his breathing soft, even his small arm cradling the teddy bear she'd mended for him the week before. A miracle still resonated in her chest. That voice, the word he'd spoken. Mama. It hadn't been loud, but it had been real. Downstairs, Maya brewed coffee, the aroma spreading through the kitchen like a small gesture of normalcy. When Preston returned, sweaty and silent, she handed him a mug without a word. He took it, their fingers brushing. He paused for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "Didn't sleep much." "I noticed," Maya replied softly. She stared into her mug, then asked, "Has he said anything this morning?" She shook her head. "But it wasn't a dream. I know what I heard. You did too." "I did," he said quietly, then exhaled. "But that also means whoever came after us knows how close he is, and they might try again." Maya's expression sharpened. "Let them try." Preston looked at her, an expression between surprise and gratitude. "You're braver than most people I know." "I'm not brave," she said. "I'm protective. That's different." They sat opposite each other, a calm before the storm they both sensed approaching. Minutes later, Lionel Hatch arrived with a file under his arm and a look that allowed no room for small talk. "I have something," he said, walking into Preston's study. "I checked all outgoing communication from this property over the past 60 days. There's a match." Preston leaned forward. Maya stood, arms crossed. "Someone accessed your calendar through a side channel, an old assistant who still had limited database access." Preston frowned. "That would be Sylvia Warner." "Bingo," Lionel finished. "Fired 6 months ago, but someone forgot to revoke her cloud access. And guess who she works for now?" Maya clenched her jaw. "Lark Technologies." Lionel nodded. "And she's not just working there. She's engaged to their COO, Greg Sinclair." Preston slammed his fist on the desk. So this wasn't just corporate, it was personal. They knew how to hit where it hurt through Eli. Exactly. The welfare report was only step one, Lionel added. But there's more. They filed a quiet injunction alleging that your acquisition of one of their subsidiaries involved coercion. That's absurd, Preston snapped. They're playing dirty Maya, he said, narrowing his eyes. And they're using Eli to rattle you. Not just me, Preston countered. Us. Lionel leaned in. There's only one move left, sir. File a countersuit. Bring all this into the open, but it comes with a risk. They'll investigate everything, including Maya. He looked up. I have nothing to hide, Preston said, standing up. And even if I did, it wouldn't matter. She's part of this family now. I won't let them stain her name. Maya caught her breath. He hadn't said those words before. Not like that. Her eyes scanned his face, trying to discern if he meant it or if he was just attempting legal protection, but he held her gaze with a quiet certainty. I'll make the call, he said. We're taking them to court publicly. By late afternoon, the news began to leak across media outlets. Calwell Dynamics had filed a massive countersuit against Lark Technologies, alleging defamation, emotional distress, and abuse of government agencies for personal gain. Maya watched the news from the guest room with the sleeping Eli beside her. Her phone vibrated nonstop with texts from friends she hadn't talked to in years. Some were supportive, some confused, some hostile. One message stood out. It was from a private number. I know what you are. He will find out too. You don't belong there. She stared at it, her hands trembling. Preston found her 20 minutes later. His expression said it all. He didn't ask. He simply took her phone and scrolled. When he saw the message, his jaw tightened. This has to stop, he said. She looked up. They're not after you, they're after me because they can't touch you without touching me first. Silence fell between them. Then Preston said, Come with me. He led her down the hall to the living room where a fire had been lit and soft jazz played. Eli stirred on the sofa, blinking sleepily. Preston knelt by his side and began to sign to him. Slowly, awkwardly, Maya watched, surprised. His signs were clumsy, but sincere. Safe, Daddy, with love, Maya. Eli's face lit up with a small smile. Preston turned back to Maya. I've been learning in silence because if I'm going to be the father he needs, I can't wait for someone else to teach me. She didn't speak at first, a lump in her throat, but when she finally found her voice, it was soft. You're already becoming that. That night, Lionel's team installed a full surveillance grid around the estate. Drones, motion sensors, perimeter alarms. No one would approach the house undetected again. But the storm wasn't just outside. It was in the headlines and the whispers, in the anonymous online comments. Maya became a silent lightning rod, praised by some, vilified by others. Rumors flew that she was a gold digger, that she'd seduced Preston for power, that she'd manipulated a vulnerable child. Preston tried to shield her, issuing statements supporting her in every press appearance, but some shadows couldn't be dispelled by declarations. One evening, after a particularly cruel article called her the maid, who would be Queen Maya, sat alone on the back porch wrapped in a blanket. Preston joined her quietly, offering a mug of tea. I used to think I could fix everything with money, he said. Turns out the things that matter most can't be bought. They have to be fought for. He sipped his tea, his eyes red-rimmed. Do you ever regret getting pulled into all this? He looked at her. No. But I believe together we'll become stronger. Her voice cracked. Do you ever regret bringing me into all this? He didn't answer with words. He reached out, took her hand, and placed it over his heart. No, he said simply, because you brought me back to mine. Tears flooded her eyes again, but this time they were not of pain. They were of hope. And that night, in the silence of a house on the edge of scandal, all three of them, Preston, Maya, and Eli, slept under the same roof with something they hadn't fully shared before. A feeling of family, fragile, hard-won, but real. The courtroom was colder than expected, a stark contrast to the emotional heat pulsing beneath Maya's skin. She sat quietly next to Preston at the defense table, her hands clasped in her lap, her breathing steady but shallow. Cameras flashed and murmurs agitated the air as reporters filled every available seat in the gallery. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a spectacle. Judge Adeline Monroe, a woman in her 60s with salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun, entered and called the session to order. Her presence was commanding without being cruel. Her gavel struck the podium firmly. "This court will now hear Calwell Dynamics versus Lark Technologies," she said, her voice firm. Maya's gaze flickered to the opposing side. Sylvia Warner sat smugly in the front row, her engagement ring flashing like a trophy. Beside her was Greg Sinclair Lark's COO with the cold demeanor of someone who believed everything was a negotiation. They barely glanced at Maya as if her role in the case was merely ornamental. But she wasn't there to be overlooked. Not anymore. Preston leaned in and whispered, "They expect you to flinch. Don't give them the satisfaction." She nodded firmly. Her fingers still trembled, but her heart did not. The initial testimonies began. Legal jargon filled the air. Each side presented arguments about data access, unauthorized calendar leaks, and the weaponization of the welfare system. Lionel Hatch took the stand, laying out his findings with clinical precision. He described the digital trail, the unrevoked access, and the links between Sylvia and Lark Technologies. The court listened, but the tension didn't truly peak until Maya's name was mentioned. And what role did Ms. Maya Williams play in any of these corporate decisions? The opposing counsel asked, his voice sharp and condescending. Lionel calmly replied, "None. She was domestic staff. Her sole concern was the child's well-being." Then why, the lawyer pressed, did she continue to involve herself in matters far beyond her professional scope? The implication was clear. The insult hung in the air. Before Lionel could respond, Judge Monroe raised a hand. "Ms. Williams, are you prepared to testify today?" Maya froze. Preston looked at her. "It's your call." She stood up slowly, her legs steady despite her pounding heart. "Yes, Your Honor. I am ready." The courtroom stirred. All eyes turned to her. As she walked to the stand, Sylvia smiled and Maya held her gaze unwavering. Under oath, Maya recounted the facts. She spoke of finding Eli, of the moments of silence shared between her and the boy who hadn't spoken for years. She told them how she learned his signs about the night of the false welfare call, about the terror in Eli's eyes when strangers entered the house. "And did Mr. Caldwell order you to act outside your duties?" Lark's lawyer asked, leaning forward. "No," Maya replied. "But I chose to protect that boy. I would do it again." Why would a housekeeper involve herself in such a delicate situation? Maya's voice didn't waver. Because that child wasn't just afraid, he was forgotten. And I know what that feels like. The courtroom fell silent. Even Sylvia's smile faded. Maya continued. "I grew up in a system that never noticed when I was hungry or when my sister couldn't hear, and no one bothered to learn to talk to her. I promised myself if I ever saw that look in another child's eyes, I wouldn't walk away." Judge Monroe observed her intently. "Thank you, Ms. Williams. You may step down." When Maya returned to her seat, Preston gave her hand a slight squeeze under the table. "You were incredible," he whispered. She didn't smile. Not yet. The fight wasn't over. Outside the courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters. They shouted questions about her relationship with Preston, about rumors of financial motivation, about her background. Maya held her head high, answering none. Preston put a protective hand on her back as they walked to the car. Inside the vehicle, the silence returned until Maya finally asked, "Do you regret putting me on that stand?" He turned to her. "Not for a second. You were the most honest person in that room, but they'll twist it. They always do." "Then let them twist it," Preston said. "Don't you bend." That night back at the estate, Eli sat with Maya in the sunroom. He was quiet, hands resting in his lap, gaze distant. She signed slowly. "Are you okay?" He hesitated. Then he signed back. "They said bad things." Maya knelt beside him. "They don't know you. They don't know us." He nodded. Then with tentative fingers, he added, "You still here?" Her heart broke a little. I'll always be here. Across the room, Preston watched the exchange. Later that night, he invited her to his office. There on the desk was a thick, officially embossed document. "What is this?" she asked. "My will," he said clearly. "I'm naming you his guardian. If anything happens to me, don't." She interrupted. "Don't talk like that." "I have to," he insisted. "They're not just attacking my business. They're coming after my soul, and my soul lives in that boy." He swallowed hard. "And if they find something against me, if they dig too deep, let them. Because you've already proven something more compelling than any background check. What, that you love him?" There was no romance in his tone, no drama, just the truth. And sometimes, that was the most beautiful thing. Later that week, the verdict came down. The court found insufficient evidence for Lark Technologies' claims and dismissed the case with prejudice. But it was the judge's final words that silenced the crowd. "I find it deeply disturbing," Judge Monroe stated, "that a private corporation would manipulate child welfare systems for corporate gain. Ms. Williams's actions reflect the highest moral standard, one we would do well to emulate. This court recognizes her not just as a witness, but as a protector." The room erupted in whispers. Sylvia's face went pale. Greg Sinclair stood and walked out before the gavel fell. Outside, the press once again swarmed Maya. This time the questions were softer, some even kind. "How does it feel to be vindicated? Will you stay with the Caldwell family?" Preston stepped forward, shielding her, but Maya didn't back down. She turned to the cameras, her gaze steady. "I didn't do this to win," she said. "I did it because a little boy needed someone who wouldn't leave." That night at home, the silence was different, not empty, but full of something sacred. Eli fell asleep on the sofa beside her, his hand intertwined with hers. Preston stood by the doorway, watching them both with a look that no longer needed explanation. Family is not always forged in blood. Sometimes it's chosen in the middle of chaos. Sometimes it's proven in a courtroom, and sometimes it is simply one hand reaching out in the storm, refusing to let go. The next morning brought a quietude that felt unfamiliar. Not the stillness of uncertainty, but the calm that follows a long, punishing storm. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the estate, warming the marble floors that once felt too cold, too sterile. Now the house felt alive, not with noise, but with peace. Maya stood at the kitchen counter making pancakes from scratch. Eli sat on a stool nearby, still in his pajamas, watching her with the soft gaze of a child who finally felt safe. He didn't speak. He rarely did, but he made a soft sign with his fingers. "Happy." Maya's chest tightened. She turned to him and signed back, "Me too." Behind them, Preston walked in silently with a mug of coffee in hand, his tie still hanging loose around his neck. His presence no longer carried the cautious rigidity of a corporate titan. Now there was a gentleness in his eyes Maya hadn't seen when they first met. "Smells like you're trying to spoil him," he joked lightly. She gave him a wry smile. "If he's starting the day watching the morning news talk about his dad, he deserves pancakes." Preston glanced at a muted television in the corner where a live interview was playing. A news anchor read the teleprompter, "Caldwell family scandal. Ends with unexpected hero, the maid who stood up to a corporation. The boy who spoke through silence." "They won't let this go anytime soon," he murmured. "I know," Maya replied, flipping a pancake. "But we don't need them to." Eli giggled as the pancake landed perfectly in the pan. It was a simple, small sound, yet it carried weight. It was joy, and joy had been scarce in this house. Later that day, a letter arrived by private courier. It was hand-delivered and sealed in a cream-colored envelope addressed to Maya. She frowned as she carefully opened it. Preston watched her from the library doorway. "Is something wrong?" She unfolded the letter, scanning the handwritten lines, and blinked in disbelief. "It's from Judge Monroe," she whispered. "She's offering to nominate me for the State Child Welfare Advisory Board." Preston took a step forward, stunned. That's significant. She says she believes my personal and professional experience could help shape future policy." Maya didn't reply immediately. Her fingers tightened around the paper. This isn't just about Eli, is it? It's bigger than him. There are more children like him out there. Preston nodded solemnly, and not enough people willing to fight for them. For the first time since the ordeal began, Maya saw something beyond the mansion, beyond even Eli. She saw a path, a purpose, not to escape who she was, but to become something more. That afternoon, the three of them drove to a modest community center on the edge of the city. The building was old but clean, its faded blue doors welcoming. Maya had learned through one of the lawyers about its underfunded after-school and therapy programs for children with disabilities. Inside, children sat in circles, some drawing, others using assisted communication tablets. A small boy around 7 struggled with his hands trying to form letters in the air. Maya knelt beside him and gently guided his fingers. Like this, she said softly, signing the word, home. He repeated it, a smile widening as he got it right. Preston stood by the door, Eli at his side holding his hand. Neither of them spoke, but their expressions were identical: awe, admiration, and a profound tenderness. As they were leaving the center, Director followed Maya out. If you ever wanted to volunteer or teach, the doors are open. She paused, then looked at Eli, who was now signing to Preston. I think I'd like that. That evening, as the sun set and painted the walls in golden hues, Maya sat alone in the garden. The scent of blooming jasmine drifted in the air, mingling with the distant sound of wind chimes. She held the judge's letter in one hand and her phone in the other. Finally, she called someone she hadn't spoken to in years, her mother's sister, Aunt Lorraine. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Maya, sweetheart. A lump formed in her throat. Hi. I just wanted to hear your voice. Oh, honey, I saw you on the news. I told your cousins. That girl right there is my niece. That's Maya Williams, and she's got more courage in her pinky finger than most folks got in their whole body. Maya blinked back tears. I didn't think I'd make it this far. Well, you did, and your mama would be so proud. They talked for nearly an hour. Laughter returned. Grief surfaced, but so did healing. By the time they said goodbye, Maya felt a piece of herself she hadn't realized was missing return. Later that night, Maya walked into Eli's room. He was already tucked into bed, a small nightlight glowing beside him. She leaned down, kissed his forehead, and turned to leave. Wait, he whispered. She spun around, startled. It was the first word he had spoken aloud in months. He pointed to her and whispered again. Stay. Maya blinked, swallowing the lump in her throat, and sat beside him. She took his hand and closed her eyes. Downstairs, Preston stood at the foot of the staircase listening. When Maya finally joined him, his eyes sought hers. Are you all right? I'm more than all right, she said. I feel an emptiness. Preston hesitated. There's something I need to ask you. He tilted his head. I know things don't usually go this way, and I don't want to rush anything, but I would like you to stay not just as staff, but as family. Maya caught her breath. Preston, I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I just wanted you to know that whatever title they gave you, witness advocate, you've already become something so much more important to me. He looked away, his heart pounding. This was never about love. No, she agreed. It was about truth. But sometimes when the truth is finally safe, love arrives. In the weeks that followed, Maya accepted the judge's nomination. She joined advocacy circles, traveled with Preston and Eli to community gatherings, and began designing inclusive curriculum for schools. Her story spread quietly, respectfully, not as a fairy tale, but as a reminder that sometimes it's not the powerful who change the world, but those who dare to care when no one else will. One spring morning, nearly a year later, a framed photo rested on the desk in Preston's office. It showed Maya and Eli sitting beneath a tree, sunlight filtering through the leaves, both of them laughing unrestrainedly. Above the image in small engraved letters read, "Family is where the storm breaks." And beneath it a simple quote from Maya herself. Justice isn't always loud.